When people are in their home environments, apparently we create a little bit more testosterone in our bodies, which is that rebuilding hormone, which should enhance and help, neuroplasticity and help us to repair ourselves. We release substantially more of it because we're in that environment that we're familiar with. And I think instinctively, we know this. I know myself, if I ever am in a relation's house or visiting somebody else and I don't know where the cups and the saucers and everything are to make my breakfast in the morning, I feel very uncomfortable. But when I get back to my own house, I'm just so happy because I feel kind of can relax in it.
Bonded by Science, proudly presented by Noble Blocks.
Is that your book in the background there on your
Yes.
bookshelf? Can you hold it up to the camera? So in the title of the book, Lights, Mirrors, Action. So this is a play on lights, camera, action.
Yes.
Right. So I saw that and I think a lot of people will catch that. What is the mirror role in this book? Like, what is the concept of mirrors and why is that part of the title?
So a little bit more about my background. I'm a physiotherapist or a physical therapist for the last 32 years. And I've really had two lives in that world. The first half of my career, I specialized in sports medicine and I worked in clinics and I worked in America for a number of years and I really enjoyed that. And I specialized in sports medicine and I still run a practice a number of evenings a week. But the second half of it was where I became hugely passionate and interested about neurology and, new treatments that can help the brain. And I developed and I founded a research group about 12 years ago, Shelley, in my university called the Neuroplasticity Research Group. And so over the past 10 years, I've had about 10 researchers that graduated with PhDs and masters in different projects. And all of them were to try and develop new treatments that potentially could help people to recover after a stroke or neurology problems. And the first one that I was enthralled about was the whole idea of a thing called mirror therapy. Now, what mirror therapy is, mirror therapy was first developed for phantom limb pain, actually. It wasn't anything to do with stroke. So if I had lost my hand, God forbid, in the morning time, there's probably a 98% chance that my brain, it's going to struggle with the sensory information being gone from that because information goes every millisecond.
It's a huge loss, yeah.
And it's going to kind of imagine that the limb is still there and it's going to also manifest itself as a pain. So these patients who'd lost limbs, they had tremendous pain and it was an awful, it was awful on their quality of lives. And this researcher back in the 90s, he was an Indian man, Ramachandran, he developed or he figured out that if a person used a mirror, and you imagine my book is a mirror and I'm hiding the limb, that I'm hiding the hand that's missing, but I'm looking in the mirror and I'm watching the good hand that's there. I'm watching it moving. Then the visual information that comes from watching the reflection actually substitutes, it actually starts to create pathways in my brain and it kind of desensitizes the brain. And it was almost instantaneously, it was a brilliant treatment for helping phantom limb pain. So what we've done, and a number of researchers over the world over the last 10 years, is we've looked at this mirror therapy because we thought, well, look at if a patient after a stroke can't move their hand or, they're very limited movement, or if their foot is the same or their lower limb, could we use a mirror hiding, the limb that's not working? And
it's painful, right? When it stays in a very...
It can be, but sometimes it isn't painful. But
okay.
Pain definitely is possible. If limbs don't move for a long time, they develop contractures and pain definitely happens. So we started working with the idea, we were working with the idea that could patients, use this. And a lot of research that has come from this proves in lots of clinical trials that it has definitely a place to play. It's not the golden ticket treatment, of course. It's not going to cure everybody, but there's more than enough research to say that it's definitely one of those 30 treatments that I spoke about earlier. And you see, even though in my research lab we've developed new technology,
Mm-hmm.
I always felt that there's a need for something for people in their own, that they can do where they don't have to spend a lot of money. Can we produce something? Can we create something for people that they could do this at home, where they could perhaps spend very minimal amounts of money and be able to carry out the same treatments? And mirror therapy is one of those things that allows that, because you can purchase a mirror on Amazon or in any store for $10 or $15, and you can set it up on your table and you can sit down like we are here, and you can do your mirror therapy successfully at home, and your caregiver can easily help you. So I have a program that I've designed for how you can carry out mirror therapy. And I you pointed out the title, and I suppose that's why mirrors were mentioned, because it's one of those probably original treatments that we work on. And I thought the lights, cameras, action would be something that maybe people would remember.
I don't know. It's good. It's like, let's roll this out. Let's go. Let's make it happen. And yeah, you mentioned a few traits that, really can shine for a caregiver, that can really facilitate recovery. And I think you listed trustworthy in your book as like the number one. What would be the other top traits that, let's say someone doesn't have a spouse, or like an immediate family member that is able to give that caregiver role. So what would they look for? Or let's say I have someone in my family that needs a caregiver, and if I was to look for a caregiver, what types of traits would I look for?
Well, I listed trustworthiness as the kind of top thing that somebody needs. Um, you know, if I was having somebody working with my wife, God forbid she had a stroke, I mean, I'd want somebody who's caring, that, is interested in what they're doing, and really wants to help that person. I want somebody who's honest, who's somebody who can explain things well to somebody. Because actually, the biggest role that a caregiver can play is simply to, let's say, for example, neuroplasticity. I believe that all stroke survivors should understand a very simple explanation of what that is, so that they're going to motivate themselves a bit more. Because if you're in a hospital waiting room, a visitor waiting room, and you've been told a week and a half to go before you go home, and there's a grey cloud over you because you don't want to go home, you think your journey is over and your chances of recovery are going to diminish, then somebody needs to explain to you that neuroplasticity is the thing that goes on forever in your brain, and that can happen.
And what is neuroplasticity? And would you say that it would, like, in due time, that neuroplasticity will be a word that everybody will understand, like the word computer? Like, computer is a multi-syllable word, so is neuroplasticity. And usually,
Yeah,
like, the more syllables in a word, the more complex.
yeah. My first my first experiences really of reading about neuroplasticity was when I found a brilliant book by Norman Doidge called The Brain That Changes Itself. And Norman has written a second book about the healing brain. And Norman Doidge is writes his books very like the renowned neurologist Oliver Sacks, where he writes chapters about case studies, about unusual treatments that can happen. And he first discussed neuroplasticity, and that this idea that, your brain is constantly changing itself. And, your brain, Shelley, is changing, listening to me now, looking at me, I'm the same. My brain is changing. People don't realize this. You create new brain cells every day, and you lose brain cells every day. And if you understand that, and you genuinely understand that, it's not a case of your brain will only be able to change within 6 months or 9 months after a stroke, then that is a very important principle to give you confidence and give you hope and a bit of motivation that, you can always change your brain. And what Norman also mentions, which is very important here, is that your brain changes not just in relation to the physical things that you do. So you moving your hand or moving your arm or your leg.
Yeah, like in sports training, right? Like you're learning new movements, new motions. Yeah, you're making them automatic.
It is, and we often hear the terms, that we create new pathways in our brain. So if I kind of move my fingers and do it 100,000 times over, then we strengthen that pathway for that movement, and that makes sense. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but some patients can't move initially; they don't have the initial movement, so they've kind of like a limb that's paralyzed. And what Norman would say as well, and again, there's lots of research to back this up, is that if a patient visualizes or they mentally practice and imagine that they're doing something, then that also changes the brain in the same way. And so it's why high performers, golfers and place kickers and things like that, they practice those things in their mind and they go through it.
Yeah. So this would be called motor imagery, right? So it's like where you imagine a movement. During that imagination process, you also try to incorporate some of the senses that would be included in that movement as well. I think that that's also shown to have some added effect for efficacy of using motor imagery. So it's not that you're just imagining yourself winning, right? That's something else, but it's about imagining how something feels as you go through the motion, and because you feel stress like on your bones, you feel your muscles contracting. Like if you rub your shoulder, you're going to feel like, is that fabric smooth, is it rough? So also recreating the environment as best as you can facilitate. Yeah.
But explaining that, so again, back to your caregiver qualities, somebody that can, you take a little explanation, read it, and then explain it to your stroke survivor or the person. That's a very, very huge quality that somebody can have. Somebody that can, read a little piece of information that says that your home is a fantastic place to actually be in because there are huge advantages to being in your home, and explaining that to somebody before they go home. Those are the things that kind of start getting rid of that dark cloud and start having people feeling positive again. Because in Ireland, and I don't know if this is the same in Canada or over in Denmark, or what's starting to be created are things called early supported discharge teams, that some patients can get after they go home. So about 10% of patients in Ireland who have had a stroke and are discharged home, they get this service from the health service, and it's where the physiotherapist, the occupational therapist, speech and language therapist, the stroke nurse, they attend the person's home for up to 6 weeks afterwards. And for those 10% of people, when they're sitting in that, 10% of stroke survivors who know that they're going to get this service, they actually feel really positive. This is what I'm hearing back, and when I'm talking to therapists who are on these teams, they feel great because they kind of then look forward to going home because they kind of feel they have the support there that in their minds is necessary.
Yeah. I could imagine it's such a scary ordeal, right? First of all, you survived the stroke, right? That's one thing. Like that you survived. And then to suddenly be in a position where you're going to feel alone, in a position like you must feel so vulnerable, at that moment in your life. Even if you have a spouse or family, it's probably going to be one of the most vulnerable that you'll ever feel, coming out of the hospital. So I think this is a fantastic idea. It's like a safety net, but it's more of a transition net rather than just like a place to land. It's like it's transitioning you out, into your home. I wanted to ask you, like, what is it about your home specifically that makes it one of the best places? Is it because you know the stairs? Is it because you know what your carpet feels like, your couch feels like? Like, what is it about the home that you believe provides one of the best locations to recover?
Yes, so what you said there about a person being in their home, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the familiarity, all of those make us feel very comfortable. And actually, not just feel, physiologically, we create an environment in our bodies because of that comfortness. There's a brilliant writer and researcher in Trinity College in Dublin. He's called Professor Ian Robertson. And he's written he's written a number of books, but one of them is called The Winner Effect. And The Winner Effect has a very interesting chapter that talks about when people are in their home environments, I know myself, if I ever am in a relation's house or visiting somebody else and I don't know where the cups and the saucers and everything are to make my breakfast in the morning, I feel very uncomfortable. But when I get back to my own house, I'm just so happy because I feel kind of can relax in there. And of course, people don't realize that this happens. And so, from a physiological point of view, you have an advantage by releasing that extra testosterone in your own home. But the other things that happen are that one is when we're in our own homes, we tend to be display. We're kind of ourselves. That sometimes this is very difficult to display when we're in a rehabilitation center. So we actually exhibit the cognitive and the emotional and the kind of mental, as well as the physical deficits that we have. They're much easier to detect when we're in our own environment because we're ourselves. And often I notice this with patients that family members will say, well, look, I didn't realize that he was forgetting as many things until I got him back to the house and I saw. So patients potentially get diagnosed with things more when they're in home. The other thing that's very important as well is this idea of flexibility to do your therapy when you want to. And this might sound like a very simple thing, but one of the big issues with stroke patients is that they feel extremely tired, more tired than they normally do after having a stroke. And an awful lot of them suffer from fatigue, this really extreme tiredness. And of course, when you wake up in the morning, usually you won't know how tired you are for a day until you wake up in the morning and, it hits you. And in a traditional rehabilitation setting, usually therapy is mapped out because a therapist has to see patients every half hour, and you get a slot. And of course, that slot, may just coincide with when you're at your tiredest every day. Whereas your home environment allows you to start your therapy later and later or whenever you want, And you see the latest guidelines that are coming out now for stroke rehabilitation from all of these stroke associations are recommending that people do, up to 2 to 3 hours of active rehabilitation a day in small little bouts, bout of rehabilitation with a therapy that's safe to do, like we talked about earlier, a rest period, then a wee bout again and a rest period. But all of those bouts can lead to 2 to 3 hours of it in an ideal world. And really, realistically, nowhere else is going to allow you to do that except in your own home.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, this is really just about logistics, right? So like logistically, this just makes sense.
It does. It does. I mean, the expenses that you save from not traveling, and also the fact that your family and friends are coming in as well. There's more. That all enhances things, like we were saying earlier. So there's natural advantages, but they need to be highlighted to that person who's waiting to come home, so that potentially they have a better, more positive attitude and look forward to that. You see.
Yeah, because some people may misunderstand the intention, right? Because they may think, well, why do you want to send me to my home? Why don't you want to give me like the best care in the clinic? And realistically, what you're saying is like, actually, no, the clinic is not the best place for you. The home, your home, is the best place for you. That is where you can receive the best care.
Well, look at it for certain patients, and again, back to your robotics earlier, there are some patients that need maximum,
Yeah, when they don't have any.
Yeah. If you have no movement and, the year starting, but you're going to be at home, you don't have that equipment. So, but what I'm targeting is the vast majority of people can certainly hugely benefit from being in their own homes, but they're not aware of it. So at least for people who can't, afford to spend, thousands of dollars on expensive therapy, well, my book was kind of that stepping stone, that bridging point for, well, here's realistic things that can be done. And an awful lot of the things are actually just learning, just, priming the brain and kind of educating and giving confidence to your caregiver that they're actually brilliant people to do stuff. And here's a suggested program that you can do. They're kind of cost-effective versions of the things we do in our labs, but actually they can be just as successful if you do them repetitively. And of course, that's the other big change of recommendations over the last number of years with stroke associations, is that it's now formally been recognized that repetitive exercises is being recommended for patients. So repetitively doing the simple exercises of movements and stretches and things that we carry out. That's what we have to try and get people doing. But how you motivate people to do that, that's another skill as well. And again, one of the best ways that helps people to motivate is to be able to prove to them and show to them that they're making progress. Because we're all that way, aren't we, Shelley? I mean, excuse me, but I notice in our house here with our kids, we find it very difficult to actually realize that they're getting tall in front of us. It's like when my relation comes in who hasn't seen them for 6 months, and they say, "Oh my God, James and Alan got so tall." And you're kind of going, did they? Unless you put them on the wall where you put the marks. And of course, then you see that they went up by that little amount. And it's the same in rehabilitation, because when I see a patient in my clinic, even in the evening times, and they come the first day and they can move their arm to here, and I give them exercises, and next week they can move the arm to there, which is actually quite substantial improvement. But they can't sense that. Then they say to me, "Did I really improve? Did I really?" So to prove to people that they can they're making progress is actually a really, really important point for motivation of keeping people.
And this is why you have measurement as another like pillar in the book. Like you got to measure your progress, and there are simple ways and there are more advanced ways to measure progress. So I think it's so true. People forget like where they started and where they are now.
It is, and it's there are simple things can be done. I know from a practical point of view that a lot of stroke patients I've worked with over the years hate the idea or the notion of taking a recording of them on a video.
They do?
They do.
Why do you
Because,
suppose they hate that?
well, I suppose, look at it's reinforcing for them their deficits a little bit. It's kind of showing them up
It's
there.
their vulnerable moment.
Yeah. But that said, if somebody can get over that and allow you to, and I saw this recently with a patient I'm working with, where I took a video of him walking in his own corridor or his own hallway in the house. And, he had this kind of step, he was able to walk, which means his level of disability is still not too bad, but it was a very chunky kind of a walk. And we videoed him just walking up and down the corridor very simply. But a week later, we did the same video, and a week later, we did the same video. And I showed it to him, and it was just even the quality of the walking had changed so much. And he would never have realized that. But when he saw it, it was amazing. He saw it, and it's such a motivator to see things like that. So keeping recordings like that are very, very important. And also what's very important, and maybe the last story that I'll tell you, Shelley, is that it's very important that a caregiver can kind of record and can kind of keep an eye what a stroke survivor is doing, because again, there's a researcher, there's a psychologist in Duke University called Dan O'Reilly, and he, as well as that experiment I mentioned earlier with the beer, he did this fabulous experiment with Lego sets. I don't know if you've heard of this before.
I definitely heard of Lego. I live in Denmark.
Definitely. So Legos.
It's where it was invented, if anyone is uncertain.
Yes, so it's appropriate. What he did was he got a group of people and he had little Lego sets. He called them Bionicles. And this set would take you 10 or 15 minutes to make up. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to divide the group in two. He wanted to pay people to make these Lego sets. But when you made the first one and you came back up to the researcher, you got your $10 for making it. And then you were handed another set. But for the second one, you were only paid $9.80. And then for the third one, $9.60. And every time you made a set, you got paid less.
I think my kids would love this experiment.
They would love it.
Even though they get paid less per set.
But what they wanted to see was, when did people feel that, they weren't getting paid enough and it wasn't worth their while to do the sets? But there was a twist, of course, to the experiment. When you, in one group, brought your Lego set completed up to the researcher looked at it, went, "Oh God, Shelley, this is great. Well done. You've done a great job here." So they acknowledged it, they praised you, they recorded it, and they placed it on a shelf behind the researcher where you could visibly see it as you were doing your next one. Now, your friend who's in the other group, when they brought their Lego set up to the researcher, nothing. There was no praise, there was no acknowledgement, there was no look of anything. In fact, the Lego set was broken up in front of the person and put into the Lego bin underneath. Now, they were still handed their Lego set and they were given the money and paid in both sets, but one was getting the praise and the acknowledgement and the recording. And what can you imagine? People who were getting the praise, the acknowledgement, the recording, they did almost twice as many sets. And you see, this principle or this concept, this holds for lots of areas of life, but it also holds for stroke recovery as well. If you're a caregiver and you realize this, it's so important that, on a daily basis, you're obviously praising the person, for working hard. You're acknowledging that, look, you did an awful lot yesterday. Look what you did. And look at this sheet here, because we've recorded what you were doing, all the effort that you were doing. And in fact, a few weeks later, we look and we say, look, you were only doing this then. Now you're doing this now. You're keeping that log. So it's like a record that they have. Doing those simple things really enhances people's motivation and keeps people going for longer. And I know some bosses that I've worked with in the past who possibly could do it listening to that LIGO experiment, because I think we all feel a little bit, a little bit of praise, a little bit of a pat on the back sometimes it goes a long way.
I think people forget to do it. And it's such a pity. And it's interesting that you're highlighting it here as like, we have to do it as an intervention, in order to help people, go through their recovery a lot easier and much more successfully. But when I'm just thinking, as you were telling me this story, I was thinking about all the years that I spent in academia and research, and all the colleagues that I had, and at that time, and there was so little praise for the accomplishments that was happening. And I really see that is such a pity, because you spend so many years working on a research. Like, you have spent countless hours researching and writing your book, and the praise in order to like that sort of like matches that effort is more than just like, wow, this is a good book. Like, you kind of feel like, well, I know you're not doing it to seek praise. That's not my point. My point is that we're really missing a lot of opportunity to keep people motivated, keep them encouraging, to do good work, to like have people like you write these books, come on the podcast, take the time to share the knowledge, because ultimately that book, it has the potential to help a lot of people. You'll never meet those people. They'll never meet you, but it's out there. It's in the universe, making a difference. So like, we need to keep that cycle of encouragement going. And as you said, it's a fundamental truth. Like, it comes down to like the basic things that you're doing in your life. So never underestimate the power of praise.
Never underestimate. And, maybe it sounds pathetic of me to say this, but what you said there, I totally agree with, is that sometimes as people, and this is nothing to do with stroke, but as we go through our lives, the further we go up the chain in terms of, positions and, head of departments and, I think sometimes people instinctively think we need less praise when we reach those positions. Whereas personally, I feel you need just as much praise. And it's not monetary praise, it's not false praise. It's just somebody to say, look, I heard what you did there last week, or you presented something. I heard that was very good, we remember those things. It gets us, funnily, it keeps us going. It's just to know that it's like the set of Lego, the building up on the shelf. We like to see that. We like to see a record of the work we've done. And we can do that. And then, of course, the concept really applies to medicine and to recovery as well. And it's all these kind of simple psychological principles that I feel we just need to highlight. There are basic things that are going on every day in life, but highlighting them for the purposes of helping somebody to rebuild better and motivate them better. I think that's really what I wanted also to achieve in the book, because I get actually, ironically, I get brilliant praise now because of the internet and social media and things. People, like, I think I said to you at the start, I don't know if it was off air or not, but relations of patients that are benefiting from the book are contacting me all the time now. And I'm getting I feel very proud, because people are telling me they're using the book in different parts of the world, and they're finding that, it's just giving them confidence. And sometimes even it's motivating them to get started again. They may have not done rehabilitation for a long time. It's kind of just saying, we'll give it another go, and people, when they come back and they tell you that they've taken some value from the book, that makes it all worthwhile. It's fantastic. I actually couldn't even have predicted some of the things that people find valuable in it. That's what's interesting.
I think it takes a lot of courage to aggregate these ideas that you have, aggregate your own learnings, aggregate your experience, push them into a book, that you hope that people will find easy to read and understand. And I think a lot of also researchers generally, and you probably know this because you've been in academia for a number of years now, that it, it it is a big step for someone in academia to write a book and say, this is how I see what science says that will work. Like, that's a huge step, because if people were to go to most publications and they read the conclusions, they will be like, and we think that this will help improve rehabilitation. Like, very few people in academia will take that stance to say, and it's because of how our culture is. It's because of, if your sample size isn't big enough, or you haven't done like all the statistics, or you haven't, tested it in different levels of patients, whether it's like, different types of stroke, then you really cannot generalize so much to say this will help. But you are actually taking all of that sort of uncertainty and you're putting into a book and saying, look, if you read this book, it has the potential to help you. Like, not just the potential, but you've actually put in like a promise. You have put it into a promise. And making promises is really scary for people. And I think it's even scarier for academics and researchers to do that. I understand that because I have been in academia. So I understand it very much. But you've also had the clinical experience to tie your academic work to, which I think makes it super powerful, because you have sort of like the case stories that you've been exposed to as an individual, and then you're actively seeking those connections with what has been produced in the scientific literature, and then you're pushing that connection out into this book, and then you're putting your name on it. And that's a big step. And I don't think that people realize like how much courage that takes for academics to do.
It's look at it. You're very good to say that, and I suppose I have the unique luxury, or the world of health, the world of physical therapy and recovery has the luxury that psychology plays a huge part in it. And I suppose, if I if I was dealing in a branch of medicine where, there wasn't a psychological issue helping people to get better or not helping people to get better, then it would be much more difficult to be as strong in my opinions about what will help people and what will not. But because, and this brings us back to where we started from, I have seen this in front of me over the last 30 years, that it's the preparation, it's the psychology point of view, the priming of patients, and, them being primed before they come to you, even, when patients tell people to come because, I'm perceived to be a good physiotherapist or a good doctor or whatever, we're already wanting to do well. We're already a bit down the road. So the treatments, I suppose it's the acknowledgement from healthcare professionals that the actual treatments themselves is not 100% of the treatment overall. It's part of that treatment. Now, I say to you, it's it's less than half the treatment, but this is my anecdotal opinion. I believe that the psychological preparation and the priming and all of that is so important, and probably is worth more than half the eventual outcome. So because I have the luxury of doing that, and because I realize that good bedside manner and good, communication skills with patients and on how you do that is so important, I can come out a little bit better. But as you said yourself, I know research, I know clinical research from carrying out research projects. I know what research designs are. I know what good evidence is. I know that systematic literature reviews are the gold standard evidence. And our labs have produced numbers of those. And we actually even have training programs for people on how to carry out systematic reviews. So I know what evidence-based research is. But I also know, as you said earlier, a lot of people don't bridge the gap between, okay, we have this research finding. How can that then apply and actually have relevance to actual clinical practice, or that clinic or that hospital where somebody's sitting and wanting to know?
Yeah, the translation part. But it's not just that how, it's that you did it. Like you took the step. I think step that does require courage, because you are sort of saying, okay, there's enough here. I have decided that there is enough here that it should come out. And I think that is another critical step that I see missing in academics generally. And I don't mean that to be mean or an insult. I just think that maybe it comes back down to the confidence thing again, that we need to instill more confidence. And maybe that confidence would come if academics actually started to get more praise for the value that they're actually, giving to the world, that they would then feel that they can take that step. Because I do believe there's a lot of great research out there that could help a number of people in various, areas of their life, whether it's just about eating healthier, making better decisions regarding finances, how to raise kids, how to stay happy. I mean, there's just so much research out there, and we're really not utilizing it.
It's, I suppose, Malcolm Gladwell's great book, Outliers, was the start for me. A doctor friend, John, from my local clinic, gave that book to me, or suggested that book to me, and I hadn't read a book like that before.
I have it.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
Everybody would take valuable information from that.
Yeah.
And, reading about the 10,000 hours rule, the idea that if you work really, really hard,
diligently, I would say.
Yeah.
Hard is one. I mean, you don't have to sweat. You just have to be diligent.
Yes, and it
Show
needs to
up
be
every day.
meaningful work.
Meaningful.
Where you're all the time kind of improving yourself. And if you do, in the principle of 10,000 hours applies. If you work really diligently like that, then you can become an expert in most areas of life. And this is actually very good information that all high school kids should be told, and every child in general, because there still is a belief that talent is what gets you to the top. And unfortunately, that's not the case. A talent initially gives you slight advantages, but hard, meaningful, diligent work will get you there. And when I read Outliers, I loved it. There was something inside it that triggered. I just enjoyed it. And what I enjoyed was that the concepts that I was talking about, I started thinking to myself, these things could apply to stroke rehabilitation or recovery. And then over the next 10 years, I've read probably 130 of those type of books. And all of them then give you interesting kind of, little bits of ideas, concepts that when they're explained to people, things that we do in our everyday lives, that when we're explained to people, it makes sense.
Sounds to me like you got really hungry for information, because 130 books is not a trivial number, because the books that you're reading you don't read those in like half a day. Like some people can read certain
but I have
novels.
My kids, I think they think I'm a bit of a bit strange, but when I read books, I have a pen. So I love the physical side of a book, because so that when I'm in there and I'm making notes as I go along, and so then I'm only reading once, but then I have, I've highlighted what I think are the concepts, and I do that and I go back then. And so when I do it the second time, you kind of go back, that's when sometimes the ideas come. And also I'm very privileged, because when I'm lecturing to the students in my undergraduate and postgraduate courses, some of these ideas I'll suggest to them, or I'll mention them, and we get a chat going, and then it kind of makes more sense. When you describe these things and talk them out, you get a sense for people understanding or not. And sometimes then the little stories, I think, are important just to describe them. I think that's probably an important aspect as well.
I think this comes out to articulating your ideas out loud. So like you get to bounce your ideas off of other people. There's something circulating in your mind. But as soon as you articulate it out loud, and then you get that response, and then you maybe mature that idea in a conversation, that is where you get more solid ideas, right? So you've put it out into the world, and you see how it can hold, like, can it hold water? Does it have substance? And I think that is a very important process. And I think also, like, you're doing it with your students, but there's less and less types of these conversations happening face to face now. Everything is going so much online. We're all digital. We're communicating in very short sentences back and forth. And we're really not allowing ourselves to articulate in the moment and the fly what's going on in our head. We're not allowing ourselves to say things incorrectly, like, oh, I didn't mean to say it that way. I think that's actually okay. It's like making a mistake in the moment and then learning that you can recover from that mistake, or that you can re-articulate what you say. It's really nice that you're having those conversations, and that you're also encouraging your students to do that as well. Just talk more. We need to walk more, and we need to talk more, right? I think that's the summary almost. But I do have one last sort of main question for you before I know you have to probably get back to your book. So I in the book you say that you have like these 20 common thinking errors that someone could potentially adopt when they're undergoing rehabilitation. And I know that the book is primarily directed towards caregivers and individuals that have experienced a stroke and are now on their rehabilitation journey. But out of those 20, because you seem to pull ideas from all facets of literature, which ones do you think translate rather well to maybe other areas of rehabilitation? Like you talks about sports medicine. So you have like athletes, you have enthusiasts that, you have your 35, 40-year-old individual that wants to go back and compete in that marathon. Or maybe it could be someone that is, recovering from cancer, or another person that has experienced some sort of invasive surgery. So you say there are 20 common thinking errors that people could potentially adopt. And I think it's important to say that we often adopt the wrong ones if we're not guided to the right ones, because we have this weird default mechanism at play in our minds sometimes.
Yeah, we do. I was giving a talk last night. So the reference for people who are listening, if they're interested in this whole idea or notion of thinking errors that we carry out in life, the reference of the writer of two fantastic books is a man called Ralph Dobelli. Ralph Dobelli. I don't know if
I
you've
have his book too. We are so kindred.
Yes. And, when I read his books, and again, he just talks about very simple things that we do in life, and we don't realize it. I better be careful when I say this first one.
Well, there's so
Shelley,
many. There's so many in his book. I have sticky notes all over his book.
Yes.
And I use them in my teaching also, because they are fantastic. It's a fantastic reference. Anyone that doesn't have this book should get this book. It is super. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just again a kind of how humans behave, and some of the things that we kind of maybe in a way don't do well. But the one that I was talking about last night to my group of my listener, the group that I was talking to, I said to how many people in here have ever bought a pair of shoes? And I suppose I was looking at the women more, and I said, bought an expensive pair of shoes, and even though they cut the heels of yourself, right, and they didn't fit very well, you kept wearing them because they just cost so much money that you just weren't prepared to throw them in the bin.
Yes.
And every hand goes up, and we all do it. Isn't that right? Men and women.
Wait, can I guess? This is the sunk cost fallacy,
yes,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sunk cost fallacy. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's something we do. We do. And I mean, look at in business and in sport and everything. Sometimes managers that aren't successful are left in place for a long time because clubs don't want to admit they've made a mistake. Sometimes in business, projects that cost millions and millions of euros, but
they just keep
are doomed to failure
funded.
and they don't because they keep going a long time. Sometimes in our own lives, we stay in jobs, don't we? And people stay in relationships sometimes that aren't healthy because we've invested so much time and energy. We're afraid to kind of just stop. And that idea, that can happen in medicine and rehabilitation as well, that people possibly invest too much time in therapies that maybe aren't working for them so well, but because they believe that this is what they should do, or they should be told this is what they do, or they read that this is what they do. So just explaining that, realize these things exist. The other thing that's quite interesting is that people when they look on the internet. People nowadays, there's so much information on the internet. And if you've had a stroke, of course, you're searching for that perfect therapy. We mentioned this earlier on. Everybody does it. But when you go on the internet, you're far, it's I think the thinking or survivorship bias, it's called. But you're 1,000 times more likely to see a successful story on the internet highlighted.
This is also the same with all the unicorns in business, right? You only hear about the unicorns that made it
Yes.
all the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, if you're at home and you haven't made the complete recovery and you're going on the internet and you're reading about all these success stories, you're naturally going to think that your situation is an unsuccess. Isn't that right? Because what's not being highlighted is that along with the perfect recovery, there'll be 1,000 people who won't have the perfect recovery, but are making recovery, but it's slow, but it's not being highlighted because it's not this eureka moment. So you have to kind of stop yourself from engaging with those type of things and comparing yourself to other people if you can possibly do it. It's important in groups that, there are stroke groups, discussion forums that people can get valuable information. And it's a balancing act. There is important information you can gain and confidence by talking to other people who've experienced just like yourself, but never compare the speed of your recovery exactly to somebody else, because like we highlighted earlier, there's so many parts of the brain that can get damaged, and the deficits that you have will definitely be unique. We can generalize them, but they're unique to you, and the recovery and the speed will be very, very different. But it's more than likely to be slow. It's not more than likely to be fast, and like what you read. So I suppose to encourage people with any condition to try not to compare themselves to what you see, these success stories, because it ultimately is more likely to lead you to be demotivated and feel like your life is not really good. And it's a bit like, I hope I'm not offending Facebook here when I say this, but sometimes one of the disadvantages of Facebook that people don't realize is that when we look at Facebook pages, we are more likely to see all the good things that are happening in somebody's life, because that's what people highlight. And so if we just go on Facebook and we look at our friends, we're oftentimes come away devastated in a way, to be demoralized, because it's like our lives then aren't nearly as good as that. So sometimes we kind of think our lives aren't as enjoyable and kind of fulfilling. But that's because Facebook shows off all the good things in general. So we just need to be mindful that there's a lot of the ordinary things that go on in life usually are not highlighted. So keep that in mind for people. So I suppose Ralph Tavelli books are fantastic, and it's lovely that you've read them and in your agreement. They highlight very simple principles that we do that can kind of affect our thinking. And I mentioned some of them that I kind of felt were just starting points, but other people can read other issues as well.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, so one of the so we have the sunk cost fallacy, like you have to be willing to let go of something that you've invested in that isn't giving you any results. And that's, of course, a very delicate decision to take, because we also talked about being diligent and not giving up, right? So I think it's important to recognize that those are two things that need to be considered simultaneously when you're want to avoid the sunk cost fallacy. And then the second one is like comparing ourselves to others, and also comparing ourselves to others when viewing specific platforms that we know only typically highlight, the highlights of somebody else's life. And that's what they are. They're just highlights. So I think that's important to make. Don't compare yourself to others. You are unique. Your injury is unique. We are so different in so many ways.
And
Absolutely.
don't go along with the herd. The kind of herd instinct, kind of social proof idea that, in general, people try to follow the crowd. It's a thing we do, and humans do. And
there's safety in numbers. We know that, right?
But you see,
don't swim alone.
we're talking here.
That's my fear. Yeah.
We're. I suppose I'm trying to give people confidence that going home should be the next phase of your rebuild or your recovery. And of course, going home isn't traditionally kind of on the menu as the natural what you do when you recover from a stroke. Going to a rehabilitation centre is the natural on the menu, isn't that right? So when you see everybody else going to a rehabilitation centre, you're going to feel um,
Yeah, you're going to
hugely,
get the FOMO, like the
yeah,
fear of missing out, right? But
that's
maybe
it.
you need a whole new headline that says you should be happy that you get to go home.
Yeah, that's it.
It's
It's
really about that you get to go home and recover, not that that is a very positive thing.
it is because if you're told you're going home, it means that your deficits are of a minor, minor nature, that you're actually able to go. So it actually should be perceived as a good thing. But for most people, and from my experiences, it's the black cloud. It's devastation.
But it's because they're feeling so vulnerable, right? Like they just experienced something very traumatic. So the sooner that they, can get their hands on a book like yours, or even go to your website or read some of your blogs, or listen to this podcast even, and to know that there are definitely things that they can do and decisions that they can take to facilitate their recovery. Yeah.
I think so. I think what I'm hoping will happen over the next few months, and I know this from talking to therapists around the world who've, read the book and kind of agree with some of the concepts. I'm hoping that I'll even break the book down into even small little kind of handouts that will even make it even more easy, that a patient could be perhaps handed a very small piece of information, a piece of chunk. So my book will be a reference book that, I think is valuable to have in a department and that people can take information from. But definitely when a patient is a week or two before they go home, they should be really getting this kind of information, what we spoke about earlier, about neuroplasticity in an easy to understand way, why your home is so good and valuable, why the person who's at home can really be a person can run a program. And those three things alone, if they were just in a little package and presented in a nice, easy to understand
In a
way.
timely manner, right? Because I
Yeah,
think that's also because, the book that you've written is geared towards both the patient and the caregiver, which is
yes,
great. So they get the same information. But it is an undertaking to sit down and read a book, especially after you've just been through
yeah.
something like this. Caregivers, different story. It's a professional outlet for them to become better at helping people. For the patient, though, they may benefit more from having timely doses of the insights that are in the book, because they also need to be ready to learn. Like you need to have a receptive mind in order for people to take that
Shelley, is it
information in.
okay just to mention one thing that
Absolutely.
uh, what in an effort to try and make it as simplified as possible, I mention a takeaway. I summarize all, in every chapter I have a takeaway message, which is a little bit of a easy to understand highlight. But in an addition to that, what I've done is I've created little QR codes that are attached to those takeaways. And when you scan the QR code, it brings you to my YouTube channel and to videos that summarize the main concepts as well. And I have found, and the feedback has been very good about this, patients who struggle to read things but can listen to, a 5 or 6 or 7 minute YouTube video that describes those concepts. Uh, the feedback has been great and maybe in the future, we'll bring an audiobook out that people can listen to at some stage. But for the moment, those videos are little chunks of information about neuroplasticity, about the things. So those can be listened to. And if people go on my YouTube channel, they can also see some of them that are related as well. And the attempt there was to just break simple ideas down and describe them that somebody could take in, that there wouldn't
Yeah.
be a huge volume of work.
That's really great because we know that people have their different ways of learning. Some people like to read and then have it reinforced with a video. Some people prefer the video right away. Some people just like to listen to other people talk. We hope so, because that's why they're tuning into the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for those people with visual issues, because I saw it practically in my clinic there about 2 months ago, I had a stroke, I had a neurology patient in, and we were talking about the book, and I was showing it to her. And of course, I hadn't realized in time that she said, "Look, I actually can't read this." So we played some of the videos while she was in, and she actually loved them. And it was actually, that kind of moment when you realize, yeah, actually, this is very important to kind of get the message as well, just to have it in a different mode.
Super. Well, Kenneth, thank you so much for
sharing your insight with me, and, to anyone that happens to be listening, with them as well. So it's been a real pleasure. I have your book. As you know, I've gone through it, and I can highly recommend that people that have an interest in becoming better, people that are interested in helping others recover with stroke, and I guess the complications that can follow afterwards. You should definitely check it out. So, huge fan. Really great work. Thank you for being with us on Bonded by Science.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we'll keep in touch.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.